Do you remember those moments when you were punished as a child for a single word that came out of your mouth? Sometimes a small swear word, sometimes an inappropriate expression, sometimes a simple word that shouldn't be said. This manifested itself as a matter of morality, manners, or discipline. But no one explicitly explained what dimension was. Nothing was taught about dimension. What was taught about dimension was the fact that words have consequences, and this fact was far deeper than you might think. Because words are not just a striking effect. Words create the distinction that consciousness makes with reality. Just as lines of computer code visually govern the entire system, the language people use governs its continuity without being noticed, and this system never addressed dimension. In the 1940s, during the development of the atomic bomb, some physicists encountered a disturbing reality during experiments. There was no realistic, passive scene. The system changed when the observer intervened. Werner Heisenberg's performance principle and subsequent quantum experiments showed that observation did not affect reality. It showed that it locked it into a specific state. Possibilities were fluid until observed. Now stop and think about this. If observation locks reality, what is language? Language is a ceaseless act of observation. When a person speaks, they don't just express, they make choices. When you say, "This is how I am," "I'm always unlucky," "Money doesn't come to me," the same things always happen in relationships. You are describing a situation. You are stating a result. And this can be unconsciously chosen in everyday conversations. Neuroscience speaks very clearly about this hidden cycle. The brain doesn't make a sharp distinction between reality and repeated expression. Constantly repeated self-description shapes neural networks in this way. So language doesn't just describe the result, it forces the brain to adapt to this unquenchable sleep. That's why, after a while, people fall into the illusion of, "I can't be different." But what's happening is, language has locked the internal system. As Carl Jung said, people are governed by unconscious, ignorant patterns. He calls this fate. However, Jung's emphasis, which many overlook, is this. A large part of these patterns are made up of stories of how we perceive ourselves. And unless the language of these stories changes, the results remain the same. When we look at ancient texts, we see that what we have accumulated is not new. The phrase "in the beginning was the Word" in the Torah is not a symbolic creation narrative. In the Vedas, the sacred sound Vak is described as the dominant foundation of the universe. In Sufism, it is said, "The word is the mirror of the soul." That is, what a person says reveals the depth of their consciousness. This knowledge has been forgotten in the modern age. Because a person who knows the power of words cannot be easily controlled. A consciousness that controls its language lives according to its inner harmony, not according to external factors. Therefore, the scope of education systems has focused not on how to speak, but on what to think. While thought is allowed to flow freely, language is declared innocent. The greatest misconception begins here. Because words are more powerful than thoughts. Thoughts come and go. Words, however, leave a mark. The moment they are spoken, they resonate in the mind, body, and perception. Therefore, some words, once spoken, cannot be taken back, because they are recorded. You experience this very clearly in daily life. Why do people who constantly complain experience constant setbacks in their lives? Why do some people have opportunities that others don't? Why do some data begin and end in the same cycle? because language allows you to carry out this process from the very beginning. In fact, it has summoned them. What happens here is this: nobody forces you. Nobody tells you, say this. People build their own cells with their own words, and then they name that cell, "This is life." If people could truly do what words can do, their way of speaking would completely change. Every sentence wouldn't be a randomly formed statement. It would be a choice to be made. People would speak less and evaluate things more, because silence is one of the rare areas where the system can be reset. Therefore, in ancient wisdom, silence is sacred. Buddha's teaching of noble silence is not an escape. It is the practice of knowing language. Because when words are scattered aimlessly, they create chaotic confusion. But when brought together, they rearrange reality. The goal here isn't to speak positively. This isn't a superficial self-help narrative. The goal is to change the language that locks reality. First, a person sees the words that limit them. Then they silence those words. Only then do they begin to construct a new language. That's why some ingrained ideas are unsettling. Because at some point, a person realizes, no one gave this to me. I've been telling myself this for years. This is as liberating as it is weighty. But it also brings this: if you are locked by words, you can unlock them with words. True power begins here, not in talking more, but in knowing what you are saying. Not in thinking more, but in recognizing which sentence defines you. Because the forgotten system says, reality doesn't shape itself against you. Reality conforms to your language. And when a person remembers this, they can never say a word the same way again. Why is the reality of language programs important? You've probably noticed that many things that limit you in your life are external circumstances, or that people aren't even lucky, and a generally unsettling sense of freedom arises. Because for the first time, it transforms into a language you've unconsciously used for years. This is a dimension not explicitly taught in any classroom. Reality is not a fixed, rigid, and permanent structure as you might think. It's not a ready-made stage waiting to be explored. On a more fundamental level, reality is a field of possibilities, and people interact with this field not only through actions, but also through language. One of the most unsettling truths quantum physics teaches us is that the universe, at its most fundamental level, is composed not of objects, but of probability waves. A particle cannot be said to be held or in a particular state until it is observed. It carries many possibilities simultaneously. This is called superposition. This concept is not just abstract knowledge belonging to the subatomic world. It is key to understanding how reality arises. Because the moment a measurement occurs, that is, when nothing is observed, the wave collapses and a single result emerges. The mistake most of us make here is thinking that this knowledge is limited to laboratories, parts, and devices. But observation is not just a physical measurement. The human mind constantly measures, separates, names, and labels. This is where language comes in, because naming is a kind of measurement. The variability of a state is about locking it from a state of possibility into a specific framework that can be constructed. Your possible versions of yourself in life, your state of being successful, struggling, healthy, exhausted, loved, or alone, can theoretically exist simultaneously and potentially. This isn't a romanticized thought. It's a realm of interpretation allowed by modern physics. But when a person says to themselves, "This is who I am. This is how my life always goes," "This is all I can do." They choose a line from this realm of possibility and reinforce it again and again. This approach is not mysticism, nor is it teaching faith. This must be emphasized because John Archibald Wheeler, one of the most important physicists of the 20th century, drew attention to precisely this point. Wheeler worked at Princeton, shared the same academic circle as Einstein, participated in the Manhattan Project, introduced the term black hole to the literature, and mentored a genius like Richard Feynman. In other words, this is not a form derived from speculation. The idea of a participatory universe, which emerged as the pinnacle of Wheeler's career, is the main reason for the great change it created in the scientific world. Wheeler says, "The universe is not a structure independent of its brightness. The observer participates in its formation." In his famous words, "No fact is a fact until it is observed." What is meant here is not that the universe is a figment of imagination. On the contrary, reality influences its meaning and form. This idea has profoundly influenced not only physics, but also psychology and linguistics, because people are the most enduring manifestation of their own limitations. And this observation is usually not silent. It is made with words. A person's unique language is like a constantly running measurement range. Each repetition makes the path of nerve signals more distinct. Neuroscience clearly demonstrates this. The brain accepts repeated narratives as a model of reality. A constantly expressed identity statement, whether negative or limiting, cyclically combines. Therefore, after a certain point, a person becomes unable to see alternatives. Possibilities have narrowed, but not because of the universe, because of language. It is important to establish a regularity here. Language alone does not create miracles, but language directs perception. Perception determines attention. Attention determines which opportunities you choose to discern, and behaviors are shaped at the end of this chain. So language does not directly create results. It determines which results are possible. That is why some people in the same city, in the same situation, with similar opportunities, live completely different lives, because their inner characters are different. One person says, "This doesn't suit me," and stops. The other continues if they think it's worth a try. The difference usually lies not in the chance to receive data, but in the internal dialogue. Ancient thinkers knew how to use this. Epictetus, when he said, "It is not events that affect us, but the state of events," was actually describing the effects of language on consciousness. Marcus Aurelius, when he said that a person's body is shaped by the thoughts repeatedly contemplated in their mind, suggested that healthy psychology would be addressed in the future. In Eastern teachings, the concept of mantra is not merely a religious repetition. It is a tool for keeping the mind at a certain frequency. It is not difficult to understand why this structure of the modern age has been pushed into the background. Because a person who has earned their living through language for years is not bound by automatic patterns. Therefore, education systems teach descriptive power, not creative power. Children are taught how to name the world, but they are not told how this naming shapes the world. As a result, a person becomes a spokesperson for a narrative that narrows their own life in a way devoid of knowledge, and they mistake this for realism. Yet most of the time, this is just a repeated measurement. The same scene is constantly observed in the same place. Possibilities don't disappear. They simply fade from your attention. The reality of language programs is important. Language is important not because it is a mystical key extending into the quantum realm, but because it is effective in structuring consciousness. When a person becomes aware of certain words, they also begin to understand which possibilities are locked away. And meanwhile, this often begins with silence. Perhaps that's why truly transformed people speak less, because they know that every sentence is not just an expression, but also a choice. And some choices are more powerful when left unsaid. Reality is not static, but what shapes it is not magic either. What shapes reality is how often, and in what way a person defines things. When language changes, perception changes. With a change in perception, there is also a change in the flow of life. And this is not a barbaric claim. It is a quiet but important truth of human experience. John Wheeler and the Participatory Universe. Observing or constructing reality. One of modern man's greatest misconceptions is the idea that reality is out there somewhere, independent of us, separate from others, and immutable. This perspective is the practical application of daily life, because it is outside our responsibility. You are left to what happens through circumstances, chance, time, or others. But 20th century physics, especially quantum mechanics, has forced us to confront a truth that fundamentally shakes this idea. Reality cannot simply be something discovered. It can be a process that emerges through participation. This is precisely where John Archibald Wheeler comes in. Wheeler is no ordinary theorist. He is a physicist who played a key role in the construction of the atomic age, introduced black hole theory into scientific terminology, analyzed Einstein's profound discoveries, and nurtured a mind like Richard Feynman. Interestingly, the results of his latest career update have shaken not only physics, but also the way people perceive themselves. Wheeler's participatory universe approach presents a simple but unsettling proposition. Observation not only reveals an already existing reality, observation can, in some way, determine the magnitude of that reality. At the quantum level, this is clear. A particle is not represented in a specific way before it is measured. It is in a wave function state. That is, probabilities are determined. The Schrödinger's cat thought experiment demonstrates this symbolically. Until the box is opened, the cat is neither alive nor dead. Both possibilities exist simultaneously. This idea seems abstract and limited to the laboratory at first glance. But the real question is, can a similar principle be applied to human life and behavior? This is precisely what Wheeler implies. Reality is not a rigid collection of objects. It is data constantly shaped by observation, interaction, and interpretation. And here, language emerges as a silent but powerful player. Because the most continuous form of human observation occurs not through devices, but through words. People have lived lives, experiences, and free words throughout the day. These are not innocent descriptions. Statements like, "That's just how I am," "That's all I can do," or "Life is hard enough," are a form of measurement. It's an attention and preference directed toward the realm of possibilities. When someone says, "I'm not good with money," they're not conducting an objective economic analysis. At that moment, I'm picking a particular scenario related to them and observing it repeatedly. In quantum terms, it's narrowing a timeline from infinite variety to convergence. The same applies to health, usage, and identity documents. Statements like, "That's just how I am," or "impossible at this age," are usually not denials. They are a form of habitual observation. In this room, neuroscience serves physics. The brain adopts repeated narratives as models of reality. Your nervous system doesn't distinguish between irony, despair, or cynicism. It simply registers what is repeated. Therefore, it cannot differentiate between subconscious identification and commands. Saying, "This is just for your members," doesn't make sense to the biological system. It simply looks at which pattern is observed frequently. This also shows why simply positive thinking doesn't work. Events of death seem artificial to most people because the words spoken on the surface constantly contradict the language of observation working deep within. If, on the one hand, you say everything is fine, while on the other hand, the inner dialogue continues, "It always goes wrong," then the dominant signal at the quantum level is clear. The true power of language lies not in the sentences themselves, but in the descriptions that become characteristic. This idea is not new. Ancient wisdoms have expressed this in writing. When Buddha said that the mind shapes the world, when the Stoics emphasized the painful application of judgments rather than events, when Rumi implied that man summons his destiny with his words, they were using different languages of the same truth. Centuries later, modern science has begun to spread this diversity of intuition to the world. This is what makes Wheeler's approach so unsettling, because if the issue is participating in the universe, then one is not merely a witness, one is a partner. This brings with it the responsibility of the present. You can no longer explain the direction of your life solely by external circumstances. You must constantly examine which possibilities you are nurturing. And this is not a comfortable confrontation for most people. There's a critical misunderstanding that needs correcting here. This approach isn't a simplified claim like, "You create everything with your thoughts." Humans aren't the entire universe. However, humans are an effective process within their own sphere of experience. Language is one of the most fundamental tools of this interaction, because through words, people accumulate and give meaning to fragments of the world. This idea is often addressed symbolically in films. The matrix consists of reality and perception. In the film Inception, all changes occur once an idea takes root in the mind. The film's structure allows for a perception of time. These aren't scientific theses. However, they demonstrate that the same parts of collective consciousness are being addressed, a change in perception and desire in lived reality. Wheeler's answer is clear. Yes, at least in the reality where experience changes. Because observation isn't just seeing. Observation is giving meaning. And people often give meaning through words. Therefore, language isn't just a simple means of communication. It's a set of choices. This filter decides which possibilities are realistic and which are impossible. Over time, this filter becomes visible, and one begins to confuse one's own limitations with universal truths. Wheeler's warning resonates here. Reality is unusable until it is observed. And humanity continues this observation daily with its language. Therefore, it is impossible to speak more or choose more detailed words. The important thing is to notice which definition is constantly repeated. Perhaps the real transformation comes not from new sentences, but from choosing not to construct certain sentences anymore. Because sometimes the most powerful observation is silence, and sometimes reality only expands when you stop narrowing it. Observation does not affect reality, it constructs it. One of the deepest seated beliefs of the human mind is this: the world is there, and we are looking at it. reality is static. We are merely observing it. But the picture presented by modern physics, especially quantum mechanics, fundamentally shakes these comforting thoughts. Because observation at the quantum level is not passive observation. Observation actively shows how an event changes. This is precisely what John Archibald Wheeler called the observer effect. According to Wheeler, the universe is not merely a staged scene. It is a living, interconnected entity shaped by subtle or unconscious participation. And this participation, contrary to what most people believe, is not limited to measurements made in a laboratory. In daily life, a person's self-descriptions, labels, and automatic expressions, even unconsciously, are forms of observation. The important point is this: the most powerful observations are not subtle, but automatic. Thoughtlessly uttered, "I'm already like that," reflexively repeated stories, patterns you apply while reading. These form the basis of knowledge, and, precisely for this reason, they work 24/7. For the nervous system, these are not interpretations. They are measurements. Modern neuroscience confirms physics here. The brain can use repetitive narratives as maps of reality, while the prefrontal cortex deals with short intervals, deeper structures that govern identity perception, particularly the limbic system and basal ganglia, look at repetition. Therefore, how many times you say something is more effective than how much you believe it. That's why unconscious language is far more powerful than hidden intention. Wheeler explained this using quantum language. Ancient traditions expressed this thousands of years ago with another word: the power of the word. In the Hindu Vedas, the word vak, or voting, is considered the creative system of the universe. In the Torah, the expression, "in the beginning was the word," is functional, not symbolic. In Islamic Sufism, kalam is not just a narrative, but a creative quality. They all point to the same mechanism. Reality is fixed in the spoken form. It is important to make a distinction here. The reason it is effective is not the magic words themselves, but the contact of physical parts. Sound waves, nervous system responses, hormone releases, and things to pay attention to. These are all measurable biological characteristics. Language regulates. The body determines perception, choice, and timing. When behaviors are repeated, the external world reacts. The mechanism is not mystical, but chain-like and systematic. The double slit experiment is a symbol of this fact. When electrons are not observed, they exhibit wave behavior. That is, multiple possibilities are carried simultaneously. But the moment you measure which slit they pass through, the wave collapses and the particles follow a specific path. The point of development is this: what changes is not the scientist's interpretation, but the disordered behavior. Observation alters the change in reality. Now let's apply this principle to human life. As you constantly change yourself, enriching yourself, being creative, playing, you become more flexible, more open, and more probabilistic. At these moments, life seems to meet at a better point. Opportunities are more easily identified because the system has not yet been narrowed down. But the moment you define yourself, the moment you say, "This is who I am, I can't do this. It always happens this way for me," you're taking a measurement. The wave collapses, the possibilities narrow, and the more this image is repeated, the more solidified the reality becomes. That's why people often continue to live the same life, because they keep making the same observation. In psychology, This is called identity traits. The human mind records the story related to its speech because that recording is a threat to the nervous system. A familiar pain is felt more safely than an unknown possibility. Therefore, even if the person doesn't want it, the reality of the light is reproduced. At the quantum level, this means the same cycle of possibilities is expressed over and over again. At this point, the only honest one's defense collapses, because honesty, when combined with spring, is often a polite name for automatic programming. You don't realize that while you think you are defining its reality, you are actually locking it in. This is where Wheeler's warning comes in. The observer is not separate from the universe. Every observation is a choice. Films treat this idea like copyright. Language, when it emerges, alters the perception of time. In The Matrix, when perception collapses, so does reality. In The Truman Show, what is depicted changes, the world expands. These aren't specific examples. However, they demonstrate that the same parts of the collective consciousness are being addressed. If perception changes, does this signal a change in lived reality? The answer is clear: yes, because lived reality consists not only of external events, but also of their full meaning. And meaning is often defined by words. Therefore, before the hidden process reveals new goals, old definitions begin to diverge. Perhaps true freedom lies in asking the question, before asking, what do I want? Which sentences can I not measure? Because sometimes life seems static, because you constantly make the same observation. And sometimes reality doesn't expect you to create more. It expects you to stop narrowing. Identity statements and timeline locking. Constructing reality with language. One of humanity's most fundamental misconceptions is believing that our own personality exists as a fixed, permanent, and independent reality. Most people unconsciously create a quantum-level interference through repetitive observations and automatic statements, limiting their own reality each day. Our words, thoughts, and the stories we routinely present produce contradictory signals in the quantum realm. Consequently, the materialization or permanence of any reality is hindered. Perhaps something emerges, but it only develops briefly because it is not recorded and there is no observation, clear measurement, or converging signal. While failures in most people's lives may seem like coincidence or a game of fate, behind them lie unconscious measurements and contradictory identity statements made through language. The solution, though difficult for most, is to make singular, clear, and nuanced observations. You cannot say, "I'm rich in the morning, but I'm penniless when I get home," and expect a response. As quantum mechanics teaches us, you must remain intermittently present and stable in that reality, observing and holding on to every possibility that exists. This is the essence of John Wheeler's participatory universe approach. Wheeler emphasizes that we don't passively perform, we actively speak, shaping the universe with our experience and words. The fundamental tool of participation is language. Language is not merely a means of communication. It is a mechanism that directly and effectively encodes reality physically and biologically. This concept is expressed very clearly in Genesis, one of humanity's most widely read and oldest texts. The first chapter says, "Let there be light," and light is created. God does not think, wish, or work in the process of creation. He speaks, and there is light. This text is not merely a religious teaching or an ancient story. It expresses a truth confirmed by modern quantum mechanics and linguistics. Speech is an action that triggers the physical realization of reality. Upon closer examination of our records, we see that the Hebrew word used in this verse is dabar. However, this doesn't simply mean word. Dabar is a multidimensional concept that doesn't simultaneously express speech, communication, action, emergence, and creation. But this isn't just a metaphysical interpretation. It's a function encoded within language itself. Words not only describe what exists, but also create and structure it. The distinctions between information and matter are not valid at the quantum level. As John Wheeler emphasizes, physical reality arises from particles of information. Information and matter are interchangeable. Therefore, language uses the programming code of physical reality. The ancient Hebrews understood this and built all their spiritually stored knowledge upon this foundation. Therefore, the rules in the sacred texts are not accidental. The third commandment, "You shall not invoke the name of the Lord in vain," is put in place to control the power of words. Words cannot be spoken randomly because words constantly measure, collapse waves, and lock specific possibilities in our subconscious and in the quantum realm. This leads to the automatic locking of our identities and time records. If you constantly say, "I always fail," that sentence isn't just a statement. It causes the universe to collapse that wave and make that probability permanent. Scientists' experiments also confirm this fact. The double-slit experiment clearly shows that observation significantly changes behavior. When electrons are not measured, they behave like waves and maintain their probability. But the moment you measure their passage through a specific slit, the wave collapses and a specific performance emerges. This directly reflects the quantum effect of the measurements we make with our words in our daily lives. If you constantly define yourself negatively, your potential shrinks, probabilities collapse, and you experience the same things over and over again. Neuroscience also reports this phenomenon. The brain shapes its identity and public opinion through repetitive narratives. The limbic system and basal ganglia constantly create a self-reinforcing and consolidating pattern. Therefore, every observation made without providing information or making changes affects both your nervous system and the reality programs around you. Thus, motivational formations cannot create lasting change unless supported by effort and deep commitment at home. Words are held physically, biologically, and metaphysically, and are also connected to the wisdom of history. In Egyptian temples, only the selection and correct pronunciation of words were used in rituals. Vedic figures regulated the universe with mantras. In China, Taoists managed energy conservation with words and breath. All these practices are a continuation of the truth proven by modern science. Language is used not only to convey meaning, but also to create reality and to survive. So, how can you use this in daily life? First of all, you must ensure the preservation of your language. Every sentence, every story, every automated comment you use while writing locks or secures what you write. Stop using limiting words. Create a consistent, clear, and powerful statement of identity. Focus firmly on the reality you choose and repeat it. This is where the protective power of the universe comes into play. The emergence of reality through language is a hidden choice. Ultimately, your statements of identity and the words you use are time-shifted locks that unconsciously limit or expand you. Your words function as an active measure in both your self-awareness and the quantum realm. Therefore, being aware of which reality you reveal and which possibilities you lock is not only a psychological strategy, but also a physical and metaphysical necessity. The power of your words, combined with the beginning, allows you to become the creator of your own universe in which it is hidden. The origin of life and the quantum power of language. From ancient knowledge to modern science. Thousands of years ago, humanity realized that words and names were more than just a means of communication. Ancient Hebrew scribes explained the fundamental reason behind the prohibition against uttering God's name. It wasn't a rule of disrespect, but a power shaped by reality at the quantum level. The Tetragrammaton, the four-letter name of Yahweh, in the wrong hands, could be divided, collapsing infinite waves of potentiality in a specific way and narrowing the range. To name something meant diminishing your power and might, making infinity physically finite. Modern quantum mechanics confirms this. A possibility exists potentially until it is observed. To name something, energize it, simultaneously collapsing other possibilities and making it singular. This knowledge is not merely a metaphysical claim. The double half experiment has proven that observation alters its disordered behavior. When electrons are not measured, they behave like waves and retain all their possibilities. However, the wave, regardless of the era, collapses the moment you observe it and crystallizes as specific particles. As ancient people experienced, when a word is not pronounced correctly or the regional distribution is incorrect, undesirable consequences can arise from the collapse of probabilities. Therefore, the name of Yahweh was invoked once a year by the high priest in the most sacred area of the temple. This must stem not from tradition, but from quantum mechanics and language. Ancient Egypt also had a similar approach. Priests, using ritual practices called Heka, manipulated and shaped reality using specific formulas to bring back the souls of the dead from the afterlife. Heka did not mean magic or random spells. It was verbal codes that manipulated probability waves, altering surprising behaviors with the correct syllable, intonation, and pause. A wrong syllable, an incorrect formula, could inadvertently close a door or trigger an unwanted probability. Therefore, they managed to measure these perfectly by memorizing them for years and passing them down from generation to generation. Reading the 42 names of God in the Book of the Dead wasn't just a prayer or a wish. It was about unlocking the shifting realities of truth. Modern science confirms the validity of this wisdom. John Wheeler's theory of the universe shows that observation not only discovers reality, but also creates it. Every observation yields a definite result by collapsing probability waves. In this way, the words we speak, whether in real life or unconsciously, write the scope of our reality at the quantum level. What we express with our thoughts becomes instructions given to the entire universe, like the correct pronunciation in Hika rituals. This is also supported by psychology and neuroscience. The human brain automatically registers and memorizes repetitive words. The limbic system can transform these repetitions into patterns of attributes and identities. A person who constantly says, "I am a failure," or "I am unlucky," not only creates a mental pattern, they lock their own time frame by narrowing their possibilities at the quantum level. Therefore, mergers or positive solutions can only be effective through mergers and the use of language. Otherwise, the old limitations will persist. The wisdom of ancient Hebrew mystics, Egyptian Heka practices, Vedic mantras, and Taoist breathwork and word techniques reflect a record now corroborated by modern science. Language creates reality, both physically and metaphysically. When words are combined with thought and intention, they function like a kind of quantum programming. Consciousness and matter can no longer be considered separately. Language produces physical results by directing waves of possibility through information and energy. This knowledge can be used to transform our identities and life experiences in daily life. View each word, its explanation, as an act of programming, a comprehensive tool stored to structure the universe. By harnessing the properties of the language you use, you can personalize yourself from limiting patterns, open up possibilities, and actively experience different aspects of your life. A single word, a sentence, or a chain of thought can either narrow or liberate the entire potential of life. In conclusion, the power of language is not merely metaphorical. It is a proven fact at both the physical and quantum levels. As my ancestors, mystics, and modern scientists have pointed out, reality is not a set of codes, unconscious chains of distribution, but the creative power of the universe, and it is hidden there. In this way, changes begin with words. If the right words are used for the right measurements, probability waves take shape and create hidden time intervals. The ability to discover and see this knowledge, hidden for millennia, is the deepest secret. Delayed choice and quantum coding of language, the time travel of words. When we delve deep into the components of humanity, words are not merely a means of communication. They are often codes directly presented to reality, often without our awareness. The ancient Egyptians practiced this with their Heka rituals, manipulating energy fields using words and sounds. A wrong syllable, a wrong intonation, a wrong pause not only diminished processes, but also created unwanted possibilities, disrupting life experiences. This wasn't superstition. It was linguistic programming at a cosmic level. Each word narrowed a wave of possibilities. Each intonation locked a time shift. This highlights Heraclitus's concept of logos according to the Greek order. Logos is not just words. It is the relation of the universe, the fundamental structure of change and life. As Heraclitus said, although logos is common to all, most people live as if they possess their own particular understanding. Beyond our subconscious perception, in the totality of reality, there is an objective linguistic structure. This structure is accessed through speech, and the details of the universe are determined. This is reminiscent of Heraclitus' saying, "You cannot step into the same river twice. Change is constant, and nothing remains static." However, the Logos offers the ability to determine the direction of this change through speech and intention. Pythagoras and the Pythagoreans asserted that reality is comprehensive and that quantities govern the universe. They understood that sound is a bridge between mathematics and matter, and believed that the right syllables and rhythms could directly alter the chaotic shape of the universe. Modern seismic science has confirmed this wisdom. When specific frequencies are released into water or sand, geometric patterns, crystal structures, and symmetries are formed. Through our words and choices, we shape the quantum constraints around us. We create patterns of limitation in our limiting characteristics. We create patterns of abundance in what we call abundance. This is not the universe listening like a human, but rather vibrating and shaping itself in a general sense. In the Far East, it has been observed that in Buddhism, mantras not only calm the mind, but also function to manifest consciousness according to a decisive choice. A mantra creates an energy burst through the structure and rhythm of the sound, tuning consciousness to a specific frequency, and the individual performs differently in the realm of possibilities. From the perspective of modern neuroscience and quantum physics, mantras are considered programmings that directly track brainwaves and energy connections. This section reveals an interesting fact regarding calculations of the past. Our observations and language not only change, but can also reprogram the possibilities of the past. Quantum delayed choice experiments show whether a vision, at the moment it occurs, will be present both in the future and in the observed past. Thus, it becomes clear that constantly experienced events can crystallize in different forms, depending on how we perceive or calculate them. Ancient cultures, aware of this, perform their rituals and prayers with complete attention and intention. Erroneous practices could have serious consequences. Modern scientists confirm this with Wheeler's theory of the universe. Observation not only discovers reality, but also creates it. Language, whether hidden or unconscious, constantly narrows the waves of probability. A "I can't" you say unconsciously is not just a psychological statement. It's a measurement that locks a unit of time at the quantum level. Repeated words and sentences take shape, controlling the subconscious and 95% of our behavior. Consequently, the power of your words differs in both ancient and modern perspectives. Language directs waves of probability through codes of reality, and its hidden uses play an active creative role in every aspect of life. Every word, every sentence creates a chain of influence stretching from the past to the present. Therefore, in the lessons common to all ancient teachings and modern quantum physics, the words you speak are a choice in the creation of the universe. Quantum entanglement, language, and the dangers of gossip. There is a common truth in the ancient teachings of humanity and in the processes of modern science. Words are not merely a means of communication. They are votes that shape reality. Mantras, binary codes, ritual formulas, and even those with names are different aspects of this mechanism. In ancient India, Sanskrit mantras were considered sacred, not because they were holy, but because their syllables and intonations were designed to create the maximum effect of the quantum field. Everything had to be programmed to awaken the growth energy centers, chakras, trigger neural stimulation, and collapse probability waves in a specific direction. This mechanism has also been confirmed by modern neurology and timing events. Repeated units activate specific brain regions, and changes occur at the level of consciousness. But this is not just a psychological effect. It is a regulation at the physical and quantum level. A similar principle is seen in Native American cultures. A person's real name would be a button that would create an effect at the energy and quantum level. The concealment of a name creates a kind of quantum entanglement. That is, the spheres of freedom of the speaker and the name holder intertwine for a time. This is why many tribes had public and private names. Private names were kept secret, not used unconsciously. This wasn't superstition, but knowledge of manipulating energy and the vastness of space through language. When we look at books of automatic magic, we see that ritual spells are tied to specific words and their sequences. Changing the order of information, mispronouncing a syllable, would cause the spell to fail. These practices, not considered superstition for centuries, were essentially quantum linguistic protocols. Therefore, the range of possibilities was shaped through intonation, observation, and intention. Perhaps angels and demons were not metaphorical, but symbols of access to and manipulation of energy patterns in the collective unconscious. Modern quantum physics, with Wheeler's distributed theory of the universe, confirms this ancient knowledge. Observation creates reality by collapsing probabilities. Whether subtle or subconscious, language constantly narrows and locks probability waves into time intervals. When someone says, "I can't," they create a limitation at both the subconscious and quantum levels. Similarly, constant gossip, judgment, or limiting statements narrow the probability fields of both the speaker and the target. Examples from history show this to be true. In ancient Egypt, it was possible to learn why Hika formulas could lead to unjust death, or why a procedure might fail. But this wasn't just a ritual issue. It was a false collapse and an error in energy analysis in the quantum realm. Similarly, in ancient Greece, Heraclitus's logos and Pythagoras' theories of sound and number pointed to the idea that speech and choice could rearrange things in the material world. Modern seismic science has also confirmed this. Certain frequencies can rearrange matter by creating symmetrical structures on water and sand. Therefore, gossip and the use of negative language do more than just create social problems. Consciously or unconsciously, it collapses the waves of possibility and initiates an energy interaction that limits both your potential and the possibilities of freedom. In short, the power of language is both creative and destructive. Ancient cultures viewed these words, used carefully and cautiously, as creative forces. They emerged not as a metaphor, but as a reality at the quantum level. The meaning of its common message in daily life. Reality is not solid, but fluid, and it is shaped through language and consciousness. The word we speak, consciously or unconsciously, is a measurement in the quantum field. These measurements are the effects of past, future, and present possibilities. Wheeler's physics combines the wisdom of ancient mystics and all ancient traditions. Your words are not just communication. They are an active tool in the creation of reality. Gossiping, belittling others, or using negative language is not just a social skill. It is an activity stemming from a reservoir of energy at the quantum level. On the other hand, when you choose your words carefully and thoughtfully, it's a creative process that guides both you and your surroundings towards positive possibilities. This is a truth confirmed by all experiences, from ancient rituals to modern science. The power of your words determines the reality of your life and your environment. Ancient traditions that preserve speech and the reality balancing cycle. Throughout human history, all ancient traditions have acknowledged that words are not merely a means of communication, but possess a power shaped by reality. Once you grasp this aspect, you begin to understand the cost of unconscious speech and the power of conscious language. Now the question is, will you use your words randomly? Or will you direct them in a way that unleashes your true creative potential? We define this mechanism, due to its differences, as the reality balancing detail. The cycle consists of 5 steps and works actively 24/7, constantly shaping your life experience. What you understand is that if unconscious speech is no longer possible, it makes no difference. 1. Identity statements and the burden of words. The first step is attributing identity to words. For example, when you say, "I have no money," even though you seem to be referring to a temporary situation, subconsciously, you become part of that situation as part of your identity. Your nervous system and reticular activation system, RA, perceive this as reality. RA determines that your brain is in a different state and your information is being determined. When you say you don't have money, all the abundance and opportunities you've missed become visible. This isn't just a psychological perception. It's a quantum level redirection of energy and capacity. An identity-focused statement allows your entire system to protect itself. The ego sabotages this to protect its identity. Thus, we lose both physically and quantum level. They lock time intervals. 2. Observing meaning and filtering perception. Secondly, the meaning of your data filters reality. The reticular activation system that scientists are researching shows that your brain only transmits support that aligns with your current beliefs. You start buying a red car, and instantly red cars start appearing around you. A similar situation exists with money. When you repeat that you are penniless, you only begin to perceive pennilessness. Abundance examines the products and solutions themselves, because the observation filter is programmed at the quantum level. 3. The collapse of probability through observation. As Wheeler's children also point out, the third step is to connect directly to the foundations of the universe. Multiple realities exist simultaneously at the quantum level. While you struggle in one time frame, success continues in another, and different probabilities persist in yet another. With the words and intentions you focus on, a particular probability collapses and is physically fixed to a time limit. Ancient Egyptian goddesses knew this in their Heka rituals. A mispronunciation of a syllable or reading it without intention could collapse the range of probabilities and lead to undesirable results. This wasn't superstition. It was linguistic programming at the quantum level. 4. The energy and vibrational power of language. The fourth step is the sonic effect of language. With correct spelling and intonation, Sanskrit mantras trigger specific energy centers. As in the teachings of Pythagoras, sound can rearrange matter. Modern seismic science shows that geometric patterns can be formed on water and sand with specific frequencies. The same principle applies to human consciousness. Your words are shaped by quantum distortion according to how they are spoken. Gossip, or the use of negative language, disrupts the energy distributor, while hidden and deliberate language creates positive possibilities. 5. Conscious language and reality programming. The fifth and final step is the use of language in the field of reality. Ancient cultures in Hebrew, Egyptian, Greek, Buddhist, Hindu, and Native American traditions taught that words should be used not merely randomly, but as creative forces guided by intention and energy. Concealing names, performing specific rituals, or repeating certain mantras and prayers were technical methods of creating reality in the quantum field. Therefore, gossip, negative statements, and unconscious speech are dangerous not only at the social level, but also at the energy and quantum level. The words you speak affect both your own time and the field programs around you. Wheeler's theory confirms what ancient traditions taught. Reality is not rigid, but systems. This is the consciousness of what exists and of ourselves. Now, becoming a student to recognize and use the power of your words is about transforming your life and influencing those around you. Once you grasp this knowledge, unconscious speech is no longer possible. Your words become an active tool in creating your reality.